Hi everybody, Zach Keenan here for DevilsDigest.com alongside our publisher, Hode Rubino. First time we've spoken since we were back in Pasadena after ASU's 42-23 victory over the UCLA Bruins. And Hode, now that ASU is 4-1, the first thing that comes to mind is the ability to handle success. It's not a trait that ASU football has been known for in the past couple of years. So maybe what are some things that ASU can do to prevent themselves from falling out of the top 25 just as quickly as they've entered it this year?
Well, I think, Zach, there's really two elements that come into play when you talk about the ability to handle success. And needless to say, it was a very emotional win by ASU over UCLA, really having quite a bit of magnitude, not only for the near future, but possibly even for the distant future. So I think that one thing is the veteran element or lack thereof of the team. And I know that some people were disappointed that in the lone loss to date at BYU that veteran element did not show up, that you had undisciplined play, turnovers, multitude of penalties. But I still think that was still more a factor of just playing in a very rowdy environment. And you and I have been both in Provo and Pasadena, and you really can't even compare both environments. And I think that the UCLA fans really not showing up, or those that showed up really not being that loud. And granted, ASU, especially in the second half, really took UCLA out of the game. But I think that really had more of an effect in terms of being disciplined and being have a clean game. And those are the same exact issues I think that really hampered ASU. So now having so many veterans on the team, and maybe also knowing that what happened in the loss to BYU, I think that the approach by the players, at least I like to think, would be just a more conducive one for success. But I think it also comes down to the coaching staff. And I remember seeing the first few practices after that BYU game, and those coaches were riding them hard. They were on them like white on rice on every little detail. And I have a feeling that especially with a short week, especially with playing a team that right now has ASU's full attention after upsetting the number 3 team in the country in Oregon just last Saturday, I like to think also that the coaches on their end are going to make sure that they are even keel as possible, knowing that all the good feelings right now surrounding the program, the fan base absolutely adoring this program, can go away like that if you're just going to lose, especially in an embarrassing manner, to a very tough Stanford team. So I think coaching staff taking the right approach and the veteran leadership of this team, at least on paper, should prevent any cockiness, and just having the right amount of confidence, which I know sometimes is easier said than done, but really having the right amount of confidence going into a very important game against Stanford on Friday night.
Speaking of ranked teams, Stanford already has 2 under their belt. They've got not only Oregon, but the USC Trojans. They've defeated both those teams. Oregon in an overtime thriller just this past weekend. And but Stanford is normally a team that in the rush game is just brute forced. This year, they're not that at all, Hode. They are ranked almost dead last in rushing yards in the Pac-12, and then they've seemed to have found most of their success in the pass game this year.
Yeah, quarterback Mckee has been, I think, the biggest surprise of the entire Pac-12, even though he was part of the Stanford program last year, but obviously with having such a formidable quarterback in Davis Mills playing ahead of him, you really didn't hear much about Mckee at all. But you look at his numbers, 11 touchdowns, no interceptions, a completion rate of nearly 65%. Granted, he's averaging just around 220 passing yards, so maybe not a gaudy number in that sense. But with all the issues that Stanford is having right now with the rushing attack, and like you said, Zach, it's very atypical for a Stanford team not to be able to successfully run the ball down the throat of opponents every Saturday. Tanner Mckee in the passing game has really been a godsend for the Stanford program in 2021. Now, they are going to miss their best wide receiver, Bryson Tremaine, who has 5 touchdowns already on the year. He was injured last week against Oregon. There were some wide receivers that did step up in his absence, and obviously overall it didn't really hurt Stanford that much because they were able to squeak out the overtime win. But I'm really curious to see what kind of approach ASU is going to take, because on the one hand, with the rushing game that Stanford is having, and even though they have pretty good running backs in Nathaniel Pete and Austin Jones, it's really not a group that has produced well all that much. And I think the offensive line and their relatively poor play has really affected that aspect. But the offensive line is also doing just enough to really protect Tanner Mckee. So I don't think ASU is really going to take their chances with the rushing game. I still think they're really going to crowd the line of scrimmage as much as they can, making sure that this running game doesn't have an epiphany and that starts being the Stanford of old and really having success against the Sun Devils on Friday. But I just feel that with the vulnerabilities that this offensive line for Stanford has shown at times, I think it would be incumbent on ASU to really apply as much pressure as possible. So it's definitely going to be more of a challenge, I think, in the aerial attack. I mean, not that Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the UCLA passing attack really was struggling against ASU. I mean, you could say, maybe more in the second half than the first half, but I have a feeling, Zach, we might look back at this game at the end of the season and say that Tanner Mckee, whether ASU loses or wins this game on Friday, is probably the best pure passing quarterback that ASU has faced all year long. So I think the Sun Devil defense, the secondary especially, really has a really tall task ahead of them. And let's not forget about the tight ends for Stanford, because it's still producing pretty well. And right now they got a great quarterback that can deliver the ball to them more often than not successfully. So the linebackers for ASU, I think in particular, are really going to have quite a challenge. We saw Greg Dulcich last Saturday for UCLA and the tight end for BYU about 3 weeks ago, having some success against this ASU defense. So I'd like to think that this unit can really draw upon those games and see how they can cover the Stanford tight ends, because that might be maybe the quote-unquote hidden element of this offense. But again, I think Tanner Mckee, as far as a quarterback in terms of his throwing abilities or rushing abilities, is really going to be a handful for this ASU defense, and they have to make sure that whatever scheme they do employ against Mckee and the Stanford offense, that they're really able to neutralize them, because like I said, I would think it's going to be a handful on Friday night.
You talked about how atypical the Stanford offense is. The defense is just very similar. Usually a stout the defense is very similar. A stout run defense that is normally able to keep control of the run game. It's been miserable this year, Hode. And I don't know if our viewers were watching, but you and I were in Pasadena, and we saw exactly what ASU did to the league's best rushing defense. What can they do to one of the, if not the worst rush defense in the Pac-12?
Well, let me start by saying this, that I know that when I talked to a UCLA insider and saying, well, your rush defense is one of the best in the country, top 10, but your pass defense is 126 out of 130 FBS teams, what do you really make of that? And he said that teams are just content to throw the ball against UCLA because they know they can't run the ball well. And I'm very happy ASU did not take that approach. Now, don't get me wrong. It goes without saying, Jaden Daniels in the aerial attack had their best game the entire year. They absolutely shredded that UCLA secondary. But especially in the second half, ASU was content to really run the ball against UCLA. And I think that ultimately that really did frustrate them, obviously keeping the UCLA offense off the field. So this Stanford offense, like I said, with Tanner Mckee can be really, really dangerous. So yes, ASU wants to run the ball against one of the weakest units they're probably going to face all year long. But I think it is imperative for ASU to really keep this offense balanced. I really hate to see this passing game for ASU that's been doing so well the last 3 weeks, for some reason, just to take a step back, just because Stanford's pass defense is pretty stingy, averaging around 191 yards a game. So I really would like to see this passing offense really still be a compliment, and not just be trapped by the stats, if you will, and say, okay, if Stanford is having such a hard time running the ball, and ASU now with DeMonte Traynor back in the lineup, and you still have Daniel Ngata who can just come off the bench cold and explode at any moment, that ASU is really going to be content with a ground and pound scheme, if you will. So if ASU really can maintain the same balance they had last week against UCLA, and again, not worry about the opponent being very strong in one aspect and not strong at all in another aspect, I think ASU can really do well with this offense. But overall, I think that fans should really like the momentum they're seeing from this ASU offense as a whole, and especially the passing game, which again, I mean, somebody was really sick about talking about how much it was struggling, but in the last few weeks, I have nothing but praise for the job Zach Hill has been doing with the game planning. I think the game planning he had against UCLA was absolutely masterful. I think Jaden Daniels is playing probably, if not his best football since he came to ASU, been pretty darn close to it, because he did have a pretty special freshman year in 2019. But I think this wide receiver group as a whole is really, really coming into its own. Curtis Hodges as a receiving tight end is playing better and better each and every week. So there's a lot of good things going for this offense, and the way they played against the UCLA defense, which I think maybe in some respects is a tougher defense to face than Stanford. The way they were able to handle the Bruins last week does give me confidence that the offense for ASU will have the right approach and will again keep that balance and again not really be all that enamored, if you will, with the fact that Stanford is having a heck of a time running the ball, and ultimately that's still the bread and butter of this ASU offense.
Hood, we know that ASU the opportunity to advance to 5-1 this week, and pundits will be very skeptical of the Sun Devils' ability to jump on this opportunity in front of them and increase upon this top 25 ranking. With all the factors in mind that we've discussed today, do you think that this Friday night in Tempe, Stanford could be the next team to knock off ASU?
Well, full disclosure, Zach, I did before the season call this Stanford game the landmine game of the season. Week 1, Stanford did not make me look smart at all, almost got shut out on the road at Kansas State. But after that, they've made me smarter and smarter in terms of that comment. So I think this game is going to be the dogfight that maybe all of us, including myself, expected to see last week in the Rose Bowl, and that really never happened, especially not in the second half. But Stanford is known really, at least this season, to keep games really, really close. And I don't think there's, again, you take out that Kansas State game, which really was a matter of them still deciding between Jack West and Tanner Mckee, who's going to be the starting quarterback, and that ultimately really hurt them in that specific contest. But otherwise, they really don't get blown out. They're really never out of the game, and that's really a credit, especially to their offense, which is much more explosive, much more imaginative that we've seen in years, maybe decades, from any Stanford offense. But I think this ASU team, on the one hand, is coming in with a lot of confidence after that big win at UCLA. But at the same time, I think they are going to be grounded again because of the short week, because of what Stanford was able to do to Oregon last Saturday. So I think from a mental standpoint, I think that ASU is actually in a better place than maybe some people will give them credit. I know ASU is a heavy favorite, probably double-digit points as we're taping this piece right now. I don't think the game is going to be that wide open in terms of a score, but I do see this, as I mentioned, the dogfight that we didn't see last week in Pasadena, and the score that I didn't think I was going to see last week in Pasadena. I think it's going to happen this week. Very, very close game, but ASU coming on top, 31-27.
Monday night into Tuesday morning, it was raining in Tempe. This guy expecting the maroon monsoon to continue Friday night when ASU in maroon will kick off against Stanford, their 6th straight night game. Odo Redford says that's an excuse. He doesn't care about it. We'll be there nonetheless. So for all of your pre, during, and post-game content, make sure you keep it locked in to DevilsDigest.com. While you're at it, give us a follow on Twitter at Devil's Digest. For Hode Rubino, I'm Zach Keenan. ASU Stanford this Friday night.